Hi everybody, I am Dr. Debra Soh. This is my second YouTube video. My first one, it was a demo of the Fleshlight launch by Kiru. So if you haven't seen that, you should check it out. I will put a link below. This video is going to be answering questions from my patrons on Patreon. So I want to say a very huge thank you to everybody who has supported me on there. I really appreciate it. You have no idea how much it means to know that people are in my corner and that you support me, and I honestly could not do what I do without your help. So thank you so much for that. Without further ado, I'm going to get straight to the questions. And in terms of the setup, so I'm filming right now on my laptop computer. I do hope to eventually have a proper camera with lighting and everything, but right now, unfortunately, this is the best that we can do. So my first question was, what was the catalyst in you being more public and outspoken regarding your research on sex science, and how has that affected your life both professionally and personally? So as a sex researcher, so I don't do sex research anymore, but when you make the decision to go into that field, definitely you know what you're signing up for. Sex research is unfortunately considered controversial because no matter what you find, you know people are going to get upset with you. So I think that was probably one part of what helps me be as outspoken as I am now as a journalist, because I can't speak for my colleagues, but definitely I would say for myself, the sense I get, well, I know for myself, I don't really care what other people think, but I think also as a sex researcher, you have to have pretty thick skin, and if you're choosing to pick a topic that is as stigmatized as sex to study for a living, then on some level you have, I think, a sense that you want to do what you're interested in, and it doesn't really matter, in terms of the hurdles you may have to jump through. So I guess that kind of translates to what I do as a journalist now, in that I really try as best I can to present the research as accurately as I can, regardless of how upset people might get as a result of me doing that. And in terms of the catalyst, so in terms of the things I've written about, my first quote-unquote, I guess, controversial op-ed was titled "Why Transgender Kids Should Wait to Transition," and that was for Pacific Standard. That came out about 2 years ago, and I guess I have, well, I didn't do the quotations, but I'll do them now. I consider that it shouldn't be controversial because everything I said was based on research. It was about desistance in gender dysphoric children, and this idea, well, it's been shown that kids who are gender dysphoric, the majority of them will outgrow their dysphoria by puberty. And so it shouldn't be controversial to say that that's what the research shows, but it is nowadays because obviously this issue is highly politicized. So at the time of my writing this op-ed, only 2 other journalists had covered it in mainstream media. Alice Drager was one, Margot Wente is the other. I'll link to both of their work below. And I mean, the mainstream media, I don't know if it's that people were ignorant about what the reality is or that they choose to only present one side of the story, because it's obviously a lot more, you get more pats on the back if you play along with the narrative. So I knew writing that op-ed that people were going to get upset, but I felt it was really important to put that information out there because within sexology, everybody knows what the truth is, but my colleagues aren't able to say that because they know there's going to be huge backlash. There's a very long history of trans activists not liking what sex researchers have to say if it doesn't go along with their agenda, and coming after sex researchers and trying to basically destroy their reputations, both personally and professionally. So, academic researchers have enough on their plate. They don't really want to be dealing with that on top of it, nor should they have to. But in terms of what kind of got me motivated to write about it publicly, I was seeing, so these op-eds that were being published, they were pretty much consistently saying that any child who says that they are the opposite sex or feels that they're born in the wrong body should be supported in wanting to transition, no matter how old they are, whether they're prepubescent or otherwise. And if not, the child will, this is what people are saying, if you don't allow your child to transition, then your child's going to try and kill themselves, which is also not true. The 40% statistic that's often used to back this up is not an accurate statistic. Even the study authors themselves in the study say that their methodology is limited. So that statistic gets thrown around a lot to emotionally blackmail parents into going along with basically this agenda. So anyway, I had been seeing these op-eds that in the comment section, concerned parents would say, my child says that they feel they are the opposite sex. I don't know that I feel comfortable going down this line of treatment with blockers and cross-sex hormones, say, or even a social transition, because it feels very experimental. And other commenters would say to the parent, well, you are transphobic, you're a bigot, your child's going to try and kill themselves. And I just felt that someone had to speak out and say something, because that's not true, and that's not what the scientific literature supports. And in terms of these children, if the majority of them are going to desist by puberty and not still feel that way, it doesn't make sense for them to transition, because obviously they're going to detransition later on, and that's going to be completely unnecessary. In the case of blockers and cross-sex hormones, sterilization. But even a social transition is not, detransitioning from that is not an easy thing for kids. So in terms of my personal life, I'm very lucky. Everyone in my life is extremely supportive of everything that I do. They know who I am. They know what I think about various topics. I never have to hide any of that. But I've also made it that way for myself. I only have people in my life who are supportive of me, and I feel that's very important no matter what you do, really. But I wrote in a recent column for the Globe and Mail how it's extremely freeing when you get to that place where you say what you really think, and then that the people who are in your life who love you and support you genuinely do that because they know who you are and what you stand for. And so I would say, if you're thinking about speaking out, that you definitely should. It's definitely, I would say, the first time is probably the hardest, and once you do that and you see it's actually not so bad, it comes much easier. I would definitely say with my writing, that one particular op-ed that I mentioned, there was definitely a lot of pushback, a lot of really angry and upset people, but it was worth it. And I think also when it comes to facts need to be set. There's full stop. There's no reason why we should not be able to have a rational discussion about things when they are true. So I guess I'll move on to my second question now. Regarding the dividing line between nature and nurture, to what extent do our societies and environments play a role in shaping us, given the restrictions and potential granted to us by our underlying biology? Is there a concrete example? So basically talking about nature versus nurture, I will say for the millionth time that gender is not a social construct. I don't know why this issue seems to still be up for debate, and why gender scholars cannot just accept that they're wrong. Thousands of studies document the effects of prenatal testosterone. Well, I do know what the problem is. I think it's that these theorists, they are only operating on theory. They couldn't be bothered to actually read the research studies on this topic, because that takes time and effort. So I've talked a lot about prenatal testosterone. I've written about it, how higher levels of exposure are associated with more male typical interests and behaviors. Lower levels are associated with more female typical interests and behaviors. And this manifests not only in children, but also in adulthood when we see the way people behave. And also this explains the reason why we don't have a 50-50 ratio of men and women in STEM. And as well, this is associated with sexual orientation. So studies have shown that we can't do these studies in children, obviously, because it's not ethical to do that to an unborn child, but if you take a little boy, say, who is more female typical in his interests and the way he behaves, he has more female friends, he wants to play with the toys that girls play with, it's likely that he was exposed to lower levels of testosterone in the womb. And we see that in animal models. So if you have male animals that are exposed to lower levels of testosterone, they gravitate towards more female typical behaviors and are sexually interested in male animals. So if gender theorists, activists, whatever, they want to say that gender is a social construct, then they're also saying essentially that sexual orientation is also a choice. I don't know that they want to go there. There's also a very large body of research supporting biological correlates to sexual orientation. In my mind, it really doesn't matter what the explanation is, whatever you're into. I think as long as you're not hurting anybody, it's nobody's business. But I think you will find they will be reluctant to say that sexual orientation is a choice, but they will very quickly say that gender is due to socialization and not biology. So in terms of, I think these theorists will often say that those of us who support biological explanations or evolutionary psychology, that we say that environment doesn't play a role at all, and that's not true. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but in terms of what I have to say about it, I think both environment and biology play roles, but environment cannot override biology. So in the case of a little boy who is female typical, wants to play with female typical toys, his parents can try all they want to encourage him to play with boys' toys, but he's always going to want to prefer the girls' toys, even if he can't play with them. And when he's in adulthood, he's more likely to gravitate towards female typical occupations that are more socially engaging, and to be gay. So, and I mean, that's also been shown in girls with a genetic condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So I feel like this is getting really long. But anyway, with these girls, it's the same thing. They were exposed to higher than usual levels of testosterone. And even when their parents give them more praise for playing with female typical toys, they will prefer boys' toys. And they're also more likely to be gay in adulthood. So, last question. What new research are you most excited about? Overall, I'm extremely excited in terms of sexology and where we are headed. I think sex research and sexology should be seen as a legitimate science, a hard science, no different from physics or, say, chemistry. The reason, well, I was going to say the reason why it isn't. But I think it's unfortunate that there is so much stigma around it, that my colleagues have to jump through all these extra hoops to get funding when what they're doing is legitimate science. Is really unfortunate. I hope that will change in the future. I also hope that these activists and this ideology will stop infiltrating the field. Definitely, I would say in the last year, I've noticed in a huge way that feminism and these certain political agendas are definitely migrating into the field in very unsettling ways. I never thought that the scientific research would actually be skewed in that way, but it is, because academic journals are happy to publish these findings because they make people happy. They know it's going to score them points with the public, and some academics are happy to go along with that narrative and promote and produce these findings because, again, people like to see that, and they know it's lucrative for them. So anyway, outside of that stuff, I think in terms of, my PhD is in neuroscience, so neuroimaging technologies also are advancing in huge ways, really exciting. Using those technologies to look at why people are into what they're into sexually. My PhD specifically, my research expertise was in sexual orientation and paraphilias, which are atypical sexual interests, as well as hypersexuality. But in terms of the atypical sexual interest aspect, using brain imaging to better understand why people like things that are different from maybe what other people like. Again, no judgment there at all, but just trying to understand, why we are the way we are. I think there's so much that will open up to us in terms of what we're able to understand as this technology further advances. So it's a really amazing time. I really hope that all the political messiness can just step aside, and that researchers are able to do what they want to do and pursue these interesting questions. So anyway, enough of a rant for me. So if you want to follow my work, I write a weekly column for Playboy.com. I also write a monthly column for the Globe and Mail. So I should mention my column for Playboy.com is Safe for Work. And as well, in terms of all the media interviews and requests I do, everything I post on social media, so you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Dr. Debra Soh. Patreon is also Dr. Debra Soh. And so thank you again for everyone's support. I love people interacting with me on social media as well, and sending me memes. So thank you for that, and hope you guys are well, and I will talk to you soon.